Hello, I'm Dr. David Burt. I'm an immunologist and a Seventh-day Adventist Christian based in Toronto, Canada. And I'm so excited and honored to be invited to join you for your convocation on Sabbath, November 13. The COVID-19 pandemic has been devastating for us all, both on a personal and societal level. During the past year, I've had the privilege of working as a member of the City of Toronto's Black Scientist Task Force on Vaccine Equity, to provide our community with accurate information to make informed decisions about COVID-19 and vaccines. On November 13, I'll be speaking on the topic, COVID-19, Separating Fact from Fiction. And I'll be sharing information about COVID vaccine history, hesitancy, and reality, especially as it relates to our Christian community. This will also be a great opportunity for us to discuss your questions about COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines. I'm really looking forward to being with you virtually on November 13. Until then, take care and God bless.
Appreciate everyone who is here on time. And so we're going to begin with the word of prayer, and then I will introduce to you our presenter, and we'll turn it over to him to give a brief introduction, and then we will have our question and answer. We will be using the chat box, so we ask for you to put your questions in the chat box. I'll take those questions directly to Dr. Burt so that he can address those, and we want to be able to be as efficient as possible. So if you get your question in the chat box, I will get it to Dr. Burt so that Dr. Burt can handle those questions. We will allow follow-ups as long as we're able to get through all of the questions first. So we're going to begin with a word of prayer. We thank you for joining us. Father in heaven, in the name of Jesus, again, we thank you for Dr. Burt being able to present to us COVID separating fact from fiction. We appreciated his presentation earlier today that provided the evidence-based science behind COVID vaccines, how we can then decide on the risk versus the benefits. And Lord, we are praying that now as people are able to engage in this question and answer format, they will be able to find their answers for questions they might have. And we pray, Lord God, that the information that is being disseminated in this presentation, they will be able to use to help others make an informed decision, Lord God. We recognize at the end of the day, it's an individual decision. We simply want to be able to present them science-based evidence that they can weigh in making their decisions about their risk and benefits of being vaccinated or not. So bless Dr. Burt to bless us again with his experience and expertise in this area is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen and amen. So for those of you who may not have been with us earlier today, I want to introduce to you our very capable presenter. Dr. Burt is an immunologist based in Toronto, Canada, with over 30 years of research experience in universities and vaccine companies. Dr. Burt has led scientific teams to develop vaccines against various infectious diseases, including influenza and SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome. He received his Bachelor's of Science from the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom, and his PhD in, his Bachelor's of Science he received in biological chemistry from Essex University in the United Kingdom, and his PhD in immunology from the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom. Dr. Burt has published over 40 peer-reviewed scientific manuscripts and is a co-inventor on 7 patents. He received the African Canadian Achievement Award in Science in 1997 and the Harry Jerome Award for Health Sciences in 2006 for his professional work and promotion of science in the community. Currently, Dr. Burt is the president of DS Burt Research and Development Consulting, offering independent consulting advice in biotechnology and vaccine research and development. Dr. Burt is the member of the City of Toronto's Black Scientists Task Force on Vaccine Equity, whose mandate is to engage the communities most impacted by the pandemic around issues related to COVID-19 and vaccines. Dr. Burt is a member of the Apple Creek Seventh-day Adventist Church in Markham, Ontario, where he teaches a youth Bible class and leads a boys mentoring program called Bridge. He is married with 2 adult daughters, enjoys guitar, soccer, and golf. And so we're going to turn it over to Dr. Burt, who's going to provide a brief introduction, and then we will be fielding your questions from the chat box. Please feel free to put your questions there. I will get them to Dr. Burt. Dr. Burt, the time is yours.
Thank you, Pastor Smith. And again, it's a pleasure for me to be with you this afternoon. I must applaud those of you who attended this morning. 9 o'clock, it's an interesting hour to have a discussion or to listen to a presentation, but thank you for being there. And this afternoon, we'll probably take a deeper dive into the issues surrounding COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines. And it will be based on the questions you ask. And hopefully I'll be able to address some of those questions. And again, I just want to reiterate that, I'm here on your invitation to provide some of my experience around vaccines, especially COVID vaccines. And as I said this morning, everyone has to choose for themselves. We even our church, although it supports vaccination, it also understands that we're all individuals and we have to make our own choice. And I respect that too. I'm only here to give you my experience, and if you have certain questions that you want to ask, if you're hesitant about the vaccines and I can help, I'm pleased to do that. One of the things I said this morning is because this is such a important issue for us as Adventists, and it's caused a lot of splits in families in the church. I just want to reiterate that we need, as Christians, as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, to recognize every person's right to choose and to treat each other with respect and love as Christ asks us to. And remember in John 13:35, he said, "By this will all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one to another." And this, ultimately, we want others to know about God's love. And that means we have to represent him in a way that reflects his love, and that people can actually say, you belong to Christ. And I'll just paraphrase what Dr. Eric Walsh said on a recent COVID panel. He said, our enemy is not our brother or the GC or the person who questions the need for vaccines or the pharmaceutical companies or the government. Our enemy is Satan. So let's have this discussion in an honorable and a respectful way, and I'll be happy to start addressing some of your questions.
So at this time, if you have questions that you would like to ask, please put them in the chat box. I will get them to Dr. Burt. You can either send the chat directly to me, direct message, so that no one else sees your message except for myself, or you can just put it out there in the general chat for everyone to see whatever you feel more comfortable with, but we want to take your questions at this time, and we're going to give those to Dr. Burt. Dr. Burt, full disclosure, I am fully vaccinated and boosted with the Moderna vaccine. So I have made my calling and election sure. But folks, this is the time. If you have questions, please put your questions in the chat box. You can send it directly to me. You can make it available for everyone. We will give them to our expert presenter, Dr. Burt, at this time. So the chat box is open. Okay, here's the first one. Okay. Okay, great. Here's the first question we have. Dr. Burt, what are your thoughts on mixing vaccines when it comes to the booster? The FDA and the CDC has now allowed for those who are going to get boosters to choose from whichever vaccine they want. They're now allowing a mixed method. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. And yes, this was an issue right at the beginning when the vaccines were rolled out, because the trials were done using specific vaccines, and we were told that we need to use the vaccines as they were tested, and we shouldn't be mixing and matching. Well, since then, and you know, we're in a pandemic and we're getting new information about the virus and also about how we can use the vaccines. And since then, a lot of studies have shown that you can mix and match the vaccines and they'll be safe. You'll get a good immune response. And if you think about it, all of the vaccines that have been approved or authorized in North America, their aim is to do one thing, and that's to generate antibodies and T-cell responses and immune responses against one specific protein of the virus. That's the S protein. And each of these vaccines that have been authorized or approved do that, whether it's an mRNA vaccine, a DNA vaccine, and shortly I assume that we'll have vaccines from, there's a company called Novavax that has a protein-based vaccine, one of the more traditional types of vaccines, but they all target the same protein, which is the S protein, which the virus needs to get into our cells. And so it sort of makes a lot of sense that you can mix and match because you're getting the same type of immune response. And the other thing I usually say to this question is, you know, those of us who take the influenza vaccine every year, at least in Canada, and I'm sure it's the same in the States, a different company might be responsible for producing the vaccine for flu this year, but next year, another company might get the contract. And they'll be using a slightly different technology, but the vaccines will be containing the same strains that the WHO identified for use in that particular year, and they'll be producing the same immune response against the hemagglutinin from the virus. So we're used to mixing and matching. So I support the idea, and it's good for us that we can have a choice, and you know, we have a bit more flexibility in making that choice. So it's a good question.
Dr. Burt, just to follow up with that question before I give you the next one, there's been some research that is currently going that if you received an mRNA vaccine like Pfizer or Moderna, that it may be beneficial to even say use the Johnson & Johnson as the booster. Now, the recommendation was based on the fact that the Johnson & Johnson, which uses an adenovirus vector, produces a different kind of immune response than the messenger RNA. So can you speak to that about the benefits of mixing and the body producing a more robust or more diverse immune response than if you just keep getting the same one? Like I did, I got Moderna and then I got the Moderna booster, but I've been hearing research about the benefit of mixing and getting a different type of immune response.
An excellent point, and Jonathan is showing his public health slant and his interest in public health, and that's an interesting point. The DNA vaccines are given via using a vector, adenovirus vector, and the quality of the immune response is slightly different. And I believe that the idea is that with those vectored vaccines, you're getting a much broader immune response in terms of activating T-cell responses, and as well as getting your antibody responses. So there is an advantage, and also there might be a slight difference in the actual antigen that's produced. Some of the antigens are the full length protein of the S protein. Some are just the truncated, the membrane part. So it makes a lot of sense to mix and match so that you can really take advantage of all the immune response, all the different types, all parts of the antigen, and the broad effector system of the immune response.
Thank you, Dr. Burt. Here's your next question, and basically is asking for you talked about this earlier, where people who are working in healthcare and they see people who are vaccinated, but they still get COVID-19 through breakthrough infections. And they're saying, hey, how do you answer this question? Why get vaccinated if you can still get COVID-19? If you can address that, please.
Yes, and you know, this is a point that is cropping up more and more now. And I think I touched on this morning in the presentation. The breakthrough infections, although we hear a lot about them, they're rare in terms of causing severe disease. Most individuals who have breakthrough infections who have been vaccinated fully might get a mild infection. And we also know that if you're vaccinated, you're going to have less viral load in your respiratory tract. So that means you're going to transmit the less virus to someone who's more susceptible. So it's still advantageous to be vaccinated, especially because you're not going to get severe disease. And as I showed this morning, 99% of those who have been double vaccinated don't get hospitalized or go into ICUs if they get reinfected. But those who aren't vaccinated really are the ones who are occupying the ICUs in Europe, in Canada, and in the US.
And here's a question. I'm not clear on it. It's something I haven't heard. What about COVID-19 vaccine sloughing? Are you familiar with that, Dr. Burt? SLOUGHING. I don't know what that is.
I don't know that word, but maybe the questioner is talking about the vaccine sort of leaching. You know, there's been some talk about individuals who've been vaccinated. They can leach the S protein, and it's affecting, I think the story was going that round that it's affecting pregnant women. I don't know if that's what the questioner is asking. Maybe the questioner can clarify if that's the point, and we can come back to that.
Give me just a second. Costina, well, she's muted, so I won't be able. If you can put something in the chat box for clarification, we will do that. Okay, you're unmuted. Go ahead, Costina. Can you tell Dr. Burt what it is specifically you're asking?
So people who are vaccinated can be carriers of the actual COVID-19 virus. It's called, is it shedding or sloughing?
Okay, thank you. So she's talking So she's talking about the fact that, some can actually be carriers and asymptomatic. So they don't have any symptoms, but they're shedding. Can you speak to that, Dr. Burt?
Yes, and that's very true. That's a fact. And again, you can be asymptomatic, you can have been vaccinated, and you can carry virus. Again, I would say that the virus load is less than if you weren't vaccinated, but you can carry virus and transmit it even if you're asymptomatic. And this really emphasizes the point about having to wear a mask. And, I think a questioner before was talking about, in the sort of healthcare setting, because we have variants and because it's possible that until you get a booster, the vaccine after 2 doses might not be giving you the strength of immunity that you need after 8 or 9 months. It's important to wear a mask when you're in the company of other people, where you're in public places. And again, it's nothing to do with mask mandates. We don't need to hear from governments to say we need a mask mandate. I mean, we need to just basically use our common sense and say, this is a situation that's happening now. Yes, I'm vaccinated, but I can still shed. We've already talked about how advantageous it is to get vaccinated, even if you can shed and if you can get COVID again. But my point is that a lot of jurisdictions have relaxed the requirement to wear masks. And I think a lot of the breakthroughs that we're seeing are because people aren't wearing masks. And, I think we need to do that. If you go to some of the Asian countries, China, Taiwan, every winter, people were wearing masks. This is before COVID. And you know something? Last winter, there was no influenza anywhere. Influenza was sort of negligible. Why? Because people were wearing masks. And so, yes, it's unfortunate that the vaccines aren't giving full protection. It's unfortunate that we have a variant going around that's preventing that from happening, but we can still prevent transmission and infection if we wear a mask.
Thank you, Dr. Burt. Your next question is, can you speak about the research that took place as the vaccine development for children? And are you confident in that research for children? Because as we know, children are not little adults, so it's not just a matter of giving them a smaller dose. How confident are you in the research for the vaccines that have been developed for children?
Okay, that's a great question. And it's a question that as parents, I'm sure that we're all asking about this, wondering, is it safe to give our young children vaccines? Well, clinical trials had to be performed, and these were randomized, placebo-controlled trials, similar to the ones that were performed for adults for 16 or 18 to 65. These were done in I think it was the 11 to or 12 to 16 or 18 group, and then from 5 to 11 or 12. And the data was very good. The size of those trials weren't as large as some of the trials for the for the adult studies, but the trials gave the same results. We saw very few major safety issues. We saw up to 100% protection. And this was using, in some cases, for the younger children, a third of the dose that adults have. So I'm quite confident that the vaccine is going to be safe and effective in that age group. And I guess we'll see in the future how that pans out, because we know from the adult studies that things that you don't see even when you're testing 30 or 40,000 people in a clinical trial, you might start seeing when you start vaccinating millions. And so just like the adult studies, where there is a phase 4 clinical study where basically the regulatory authorities are looking to see how the vaccine performs in the real world after millions of individuals have taken it, that same surveillance will continue for children. And if there's anything that is untoward, just like when we saw myocarditis and the blood clots, the regulatory authorities took action. The same thing will happen with children, and even more so, I'm assuming, because of the age of the children. So I'm pretty confident that the process will continue. But as far as we know at this time, the vaccines are safe and effective in children. We've lost your voice, Jonathan.
Sorry about that. Another question here is that there's a question that's being asked about the pill that is coming to the market. Can you talk about that pill
Yes.
that is coming to the market?
Yes, yes, that's a good question. There are 2 pills, in fact. One is from Pfizer, and the other is from Merck. And these pills are antivirals, so they prevent or they help to reduce the impact of the viral infection. And I've got some data here. The efficacy for the Merck pill, which came out a bit earlier, is about 50% at reducing hospitalization and death. And the Pfizer pill is about 90%, 89% effective. Now, I haven't seen the actual data because a lot of these came out in press releases. So this is another arm in that arsenal that we have in terms of tackling COVID-19. And if you remember what I showed this morning, the Swiss cheese slices, I mean, the more we have in our armory, the better. But I would just say that prevention is always better than cure. And these drugs, these antivirals, have to be given once you know that you've been infected. And so you still have this risk of infection, and you still have to be careful that you don't get some of the long haul problems. But yes, these drugs are another breakthrough in our attempt to deal with the COVID.
Great. Can you talk about the monoclonal antibodies?
Yes, these antibodies are quite effective. They're used to treat individuals. And the first set of monoclonal antibodies, these are antibodies that are basically targeting the S protein again. And the first set of antibodies had to be given by intravenous infusion. And so unless you're someone like President Trump or other people who have a certain status where, you know, the hospitals are willing to do this, it wasn't the best, wasn't a treatment that everyone could have easily. But I know in Canada, a lot of, even some people that I know from our church who were in ICU, they were given monoclonal antibodies, and this helped them a lot. So monoclonal antibodies are effective, and now there's an antibody that can be given subcutaneously, just like a vaccination with a needle. And this has been shown to be 81% in reducing or preventing symptomatic COVID in uninfected household contacts. So in a household situation where there's an infected person and there's not infected person, if you treat the non-infected with these monoclonal antibodies, I think it's from Regeneron that makes this, then you get 89%, about 80% protection. So these are working, and now that you can deliver them intradermally, they're going to be available more readily for the general population. Yeah, I think that deals with that.
Thank you, Dr. Burt. Do you think that boosters for COVID-19 will be something we'll take annually like we do for the flu?
It seems that might be the case. I think eventually the booster will probably not be the same from using the same strain that the current vaccines are based on, because it's interesting that although the strain is Delta, this variant is Delta that's causing a lot of the problems, it's interesting that we're still using the vaccine with the earlier strain, S protein. So I imagine that if SARS-CoV-2 becomes endemic, just like influenza, then we might be in a situation where there might be an annual booster, but probably not with the same strain, maybe just with the new strain that's circulating. But also it depends on how long our immunity lasts, and that's still an issue. So if our immunity is not strong and is not lasting long enough, then we might have to get a booster with the same strain. But it's possible. We don't know yet, but it's certainly looking that it's going to be likely, because we're already talking about getting booster shots at this time.
One of our questions is, again, talking about therapeutics. And you mentioned, we talked about monoclonal antibodies, but can you talk about remdesivir, which is being used as a therapeutic as well? And then I'm going to ask you about another one that is very controversial, but what can you say about remdesivir? Is that a monoclonal antibody that you just mentioned?
No, remdesivir is an antiviral, and it's really a repurposed drug. It's, when COVID came, the pandemic started, the first thing that researchers did was to see what they had, on their shelves, what drugs might be able to be effective against COVID. And remdesivir was one of the ones that was found to be effective. And apparently patients that are treated with the drug recovered 31% faster than those treated with placebo. So it's not a magic bullet. You'll recover a bit more rapidly, and it's used extensively in with hospitalized individuals. But it's a drug that was an antiviral that is FDA approved, and it was tested and found to be effective against COVID.
So now the question is about ivermectin. There's been a great deal of controversy, stuff on the internet talking about its effects, even though the FDA has not approved it. As an immunologist, can you give us your professional opinion about the use of ivermectin for COVID?
Yes, I knew you were going to ask me about ivermectin when you said controversial. Ivermectin it's a cheap drug, so that's an advantage. It's an antiparasitic drug, and again, as an immunologist, as a virologist, I wouldn't assume that an anti-parasitic drug would be the best choice for treating a virus like the one that causes COVID-19. Remdesivir makes a bit more sense, but in any case, some work was done. Again, ivermectin a drug that's off the shelf. Some work was done suggesting that ivermectin could lower the viral load in the test tube, when you're infecting cells with the virus, and also they thought that might be able to reduce some of the symptoms. Now, there are studies that have been done looking at ivermectin, but one of the problems was that these studies weren't done using that gold standard of placebo-controlled studies. Often ivermectin was used along with dexamethasone, which is used regularly, and remdesivir. And so it was difficult to know what was going on. I will say that we have been advised not to use ivermectin unless it's been used as a part of a clinical trial. And so at this time, there's no evidence that it has any effect from the studies that have been done, but there are 31 ongoing clinical trials trying to evaluate ivermectin in using that gold standard, randomized, placebo-controlled clinical study. So at the moment, the advice is not to use it because we just don't know whether it's going to work or not. And there have been some safety problems, some overdosing, and again, some powerful voices have been promoting it, but we have to wait until we get the data from the science, from the clinical trials.
Thank you. People talk about, it's interesting, people talk about, the vaccines were rushed and so forth, but there's absolutely no data, no trials. And people want to take ivermectin, which there's not a randomized controlled trial to support its effectiveness, but they're willing to try that, but not willing to try the vaccines, which have been randomized controlled trials, millions of people who've had them and so forth. So it's just interesting what people are willing to try.
Yes, it's
and
very
what they're
interesting.
not.
Very interesting.
So here's a question, because we have big holiday coming up, Thanksgiving, and we have people who will be traveling to see loved ones. And one of the questions that came in is this individual has 6 fully vaccinated people coming to visit for the holidays, wanting to know, they're going to be there for about 4 days at this individual's home. Would it be appropriate for them because we have the weather that can support it, to have their meals outdoors, patio, maybe ask them to sleep with the windows open to increase airflow, to reduce any possibility of transmission, even though folks are vaccinated? What would your advice be, Dr. Burt?
I would say that is good advice that the questioner is suggesting. If you're in Canada now, you wouldn't be able to have your meals outdoors. So again, if you're outside, there's less chance of you spreading or acquiring COVID. And even though we've been vaccinated, fully vaccinated, we've already talked about the possible of getting breakthrough infections. You don't know where these relatives have been in terms of contact with other people. So it's always safe. It's good that they've been vaccinated, but it's always safer to keep performing the precautions. When we went to England a few weeks ago, in fact, we have some relatives who aren't vaccinated and didn't want to get vaccinated, and we went to visit my mother-in-law, who is vaccinated, and we had to ask them while we were there to wear a mask when they came in to see the mother-in-law, and also we wore a mask really to protect ourselves, because in fact we found out that the whole family had COVID, because they'd gone to a camp. It was a church camp, and I don't know why they had this camp, but it was a youth camp, and nearly everyone came down with COVID. So it's wise to protect yourself because we don't really know. But it's good that they've been vaccinated. But I would say still take precautions. Make sure you get lots of fresh air, and do as much as you can outside. Just to protect yourselves and to protect them.
And just as a follow-up to that, Dr. Burton, can you talk about the benefit and the role of testing? So even though you're fully vaccinated, the role of getting a COVID test.
Now, this is, of course, I mean, it would be wonderful if we could all get tested regularly. But I know there's a reluctance for governments to carry on doing that. When I went to England to see my mother is in a nursing home, and every day before we went, we had to have a test. It was one of those rapid antigen tests, but so it wasn't as accurate as a PCR test, but we had to be tested because nursing homes, as you know, are where you can really spread the infection. So I would say that it's probably not feasible to test everyone and to continue to be tested. And I know a lot of governments are saying if you want to be tested, you have to pay for the test. So yes, it'd be nice, but I don't think it's really going to happen unless you want to pay for the test yourself. And I mean, it might be worth doing it. For instance, when I came back from England, for a few days, I had a bad cold. I was coughing a lot. And I was wondering, well, did I come back with COVID? But in Canada, we can get tested free of charge. It was a PCR test, and thankfully it wasn't COVID, and I recovered from that. So I don't know what the situation is in the US, if you can sort of still turn up and get tested free of charge. I mean, if you're concerned, you can pay for a test, I assume, but I don't think it's I don't think it's going to be something that is going to happen. I think governments are trying to save money, and I think it's probably better for us to take the precautions. I think someone said, follow the Swiss cheese principle. You know, don't rely on any one thing, but take as many of the precautions together as you can.
This question deals with what one scientist calls reactionicity as opposed to side effects. They like to say there's simply a reaction, but for the sake of layman terms, should we anticipate some of those side effects or reactions to the booster shot that we did from the second doses of the mRNA vaccines?
And that's a really great and interesting question. And I'm not sure what the answer is to that. I mean, you've had a booster, yes. and I don't know how it compared with your first and second shot, and I'm not sure if there's enough data to say what's going to happen. And everyone's different. I mean, some people just don't get any reactogenicity after the first and second doses, and I haven't seen any data on that. There might be some data out there, but I know that the booster can really bring back the immunity to the level that it was, at the optimal stage after the second dose. But in terms of the reactogenicity, I'm not sure. And what was your situation, Jonathan? What was not that it's going to be typical, but
right. For me, when I got my second dose of Moderna, I got all of the things that they said you should expect. I had pain in the injection site. I had the fever. I had the fatigue. I had chills. I had body ache. It felt like I had the flu for 48 hours, and then magically it all dissipated. It was gone. 2 days later, I was exercising and I was fine. When I got my booster, I was preparing myself for that However, I had no pain at the injection site, which I was surprised. I was anticipating having that. I did have the fatigue for 24 hours, no fever, no chills, no body aches, but I was fatigued for 24 hours. And then the next day I was fine. I know it was another individual who got a booster and they were down like it was the second shot of the mRNA vaccine. And so obviously our biologic is different, but mine was mild. Another person's, theirs was more severe.
Okay, so maybe the answer is to expect something, and if you don't get a bad reaction, that's icing on the cake. But I think it depends on you, and it'll be interesting to see what the data says. After enough people have been boosted with the vaccine.
Now, you addressed this earlier, but there's a question that is asking for you to explain why there's a small group of people who have a severe adverse reaction to the administration of a vaccine or a booster. Can you again explain why that may occur?
Now, if we're talking about reactogenicity, as you've described, it's an uncomfortable thing, but it passes. But it's really telling you that the immune system is working. That because the immune system causes inflammation, the immune system is responding to the fact that you've got something foreign, and especially after the second dose, you've got your memory cells there. They're waiting, and they can respond rapidly. They're going to shoot out a lot of these cytokines that cause inflammatory responses. But that's just the reaction that you have to the vaccine, and it depends on the individual. Some people don't see that type of reaction, and actually that reaction from the immune system is thought to be one of the reasons why COVID causes so much problems in the lung in some cases, because you're getting that I think it's called a cytokine burst storm. Yeah, because your immune system is reacting so strongly. So it depends on the individual, but usually it's telling you that the immune system is kicking in, and if you can wait a couple of days for it to subside, then everything should be fine.
Pastor, and the actual question was, in patients who've had COVID and get the vaccine and booster, seeing the reaction last up to 2 weeks. I'm a physician and I've seen it last longer. Is that the same rationale that you've used for just getting the vaccine and a booster and a second dose in patients who've actually had COVID and then get the similar reaction, or actually something worse, lasting as long as 2 to 3 weeks out from their vaccination and booster? Thank you.
Okay, I see the question now. I see the question. I'm not sure. I think it's probably still related to the fact that they've got the immune system is giving them that boost. Because if you've had COVID, I assume that that's just like getting a primary vaccine, and then you get a boost. I don't know how many patients, what percentage of your patients have that type of reaction. There are a few individuals who, just from the vaccine, are knocked out for a week or so. But it really depends on, again, how often you're seeing that, and if it's just 1 or 2 individuals. But I think it's probably still related to the fact that you're boosting a response. And I think that would be an interesting thing to look at in more detail, because I'm not sure why that booster with the vaccine should be causing such a tremendous impact to reactogenicity that lasts for so long.
And another question here regarding inhaled corticosteroids that we use for asthma. Is it possible that those can be protective against the respiratory symptoms that are caused by COVID-19?
Now, it's possible. I know that dexamethasone is used, which is an anti-inflammatory steroid, and that's used normally to treat allergic reactions and some autoimmune diseases. So anything that causes inflammation, an inflammatory response. And that's approved. It's been shown to benefit, especially people who are requiring oxygen or on ventilators. So yes, but I think it would have to be, depending on which drug you're talking about, it would have to be tested thoroughly. And as far as I know, dexamethasone is one of the few steroids that's used and has been approved. But in theory, that's what the steroids do. They would reduce the inflammation.
All right. This question is regarding, there's been discussion in the news regarding a large percentage of deer in the Midwest that have COVID, and it seems that it goes from animals and then it will cross over into humans. Do you expect that the current vaccines might protect against all additional variants, or will they need to formulate something new for different variants?
Yes, and that's an interesting observation, because the same thing happened in I think it was Norway or Denmark, where the mink farms, and I think you have them in the States as well, the minks on these mink farms caught COVID, and there was a mutation, and it passed from the mink to humans, to the people working on the farm. So again, it's a coronavirus that's a variant of the SARS-CoV-2, and yes, it's possible that if a mutation has happened in an animal and it jumps to a human, we might have to develop a vaccine to address that particular strain. And in fact, I mean, we're realizing that just like influenza, coronaviruses seem to be coming from an animal species to a human, and so it's not unexpected. I know in Canada some dogs have had COVID as well. So depending on the strain, there may be a need for a new variant. And the good thing about the mRNA vaccines especially is that you can develop these new strains very rapidly. I think I showed you this morning how rapidly the Moderna vaccine was developed. And once you've got, it's like a cassette, you can just slip in the new sequence, and within days you can develop the new vaccine. So that's a possibility, and we have the technology to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Burt. There's a question, a gentleman or someone who has a daughter who has allergic reaction to nuts and peanuts. And he wants to know, is it safe to have his daughter vaccinated and not be concerned about a severe allergic reaction?
Okay, that's a great question. And although I'm not an MD, I'm a PhD, I'm a scientist, but I know in terms of the vaccines, none of the vaccines that have been authorized so far have food products associated with them. They don't even have preservatives. So unless your daughter is allergic to one of the components in the vaccine, and for the mRNA vaccines, it seems to be polyethylene glycol. So unless your daughter is known to be allergic to one of those components, she should be fine. But like all of these situations, you should refer to your clinician, your family doctor, let them know that your daughter's allergic, and they will take the precautions at the time when the vaccine has been delivered to make sure that, you know, if anything happens, they can treat your daughter on the spot with epinephrine or something similar.
Thank you. There's a question here. I know I got my flu shot separated 3 weeks from my booster, but the individual is asking, is it okay to get your flu vaccine and your booster on the same day? What's your professional opinion on that?
Well, I'm going to give you an opinion, but it's not my opinion. It's what's been recommended now, and I don't know if it's the same for the US, and I think it is. I think the CDC is saying this, but here in Canada, you can get the flu shot and the COVID shot at the same time. One is given in one arm, and the other is given in another arm. And I know initially you had to have a few weeks between getting one shot and another shot, but apparently that recommendation has changed. So I would say if you want to get the flu shot and the COVID shot, I mean, you can get them both at the same time, but check to make sure that that's the advice in the US. I know that's the advice in Canada.
I'm waiting for some other questions to come in, but can we talk about masks? Because I think, you know, while we're in this season, wearing masks are important, but I think the conversation needs to move beyond mask wearing to now the types of masks that are more protective. So quick example, here's my mask that is cloth that I wear representing U of A, which over here, yeah, U of A. Cloth mask that I wear. I'll usually have a filter, but some of the data is suggesting that we need to probably upgrade our mask wearing. So what I also now wear when I'm going to school is this is a KF94 mask. It's a really comfortable mask, very breathable, covers the nose well, and provides an extra level of protection. And so this is what I wear when I'm going to school. However, if I'm going someplace like a hospital, I have a KN95 mask to keep me going and protected in that sense when I'm going someplace that is more high risk. So can you talk about masks? What's an appropriate mask? What mask provides the best safety? Since we're going into a flu season and we know that the masks, the things that we did that were protective of COVID last winter also protected us from the flu, which you mentioned earlier. So what would you recommend and suggest about masks?
Well, I think you've just given a great demonstration on the different when we should be wearing them. All I would say is that it's again, don't worry about mandates or not. I think if you know the information, you can make an informed decision for yourself. And yes, if you're going to a place where there's going to be if you go to a hospital setting or a nursing home setting, you probably want to wear one of the N95 or K95s. What you shouldn't be wearing, people just put their scarf, you know, a scarf around their face and think that they're protected or they're not going to spread anything. And those are pretty useless. So if it's a cloth mask, you need to have at least 2 layers. And, you know, there are some good masks. A friend of ours in the UK gave us these fancy masks when we were over there, and there are about 3 layers here. So these you need to wear a proper layered mask, and you know, it's important for you and for other people to feel comfortable. We have this sports team in I'm sure you've heard of the Raptors.
Yes.
Not doing so well this year, but you know, we had our moments. But in Canada, when you go to, like, we went to the Raptors game, the first game of the season, you can't get into the stadium unless you've been double vaxxed. You have to show your vaccine certificate. You have to show your ID. And when you go in there, you have to wear a mask. And, you know, that's really reassuring to know that even if people aren't wearing a mask properly, you know that they've been vaccinated and you wear your mask, and a proper mask that's appropriate for the situation.
Well, I wish we had a citizenry as knowledgeable and as respectful as you all have in Canada. We are struggling, as you are aware, down here, getting people to do some things that are very sensible, not only to protect themselves, but to have the courtesy and decency to at least protect others. So they're telling me I've got a few minutes, so I'll give you a couple of minutes here to say any parting remarks that you'd like to share with us, Dr. Burt.
Okay, maybe I'll just finish with some comments about our responsibility in terms of passing on information, because, you know, I understand it's so confusing sometimes when you get bombarded with videos and things from social media. And these are coming from people that are supposed to be experts, but, you know, the real experts know that a lot of the things that are coming through are just incorrect and not true. And I think one of the things we have to be careful of, especially Christians, you know, if Adventist Christians too, if we don't know where the information is coming from and we haven't really checked it ourselves, we shouldn't really be passing it on. We shouldn't really be passing it on. You know, we're told that we shouldn't be bearing false witness. And when we do that, it's really spreading stuff that we don't know if it's true or not. And I think it's really important for us to be careful, because can you imagine if we spread that information about vaccines and people that we're spreading it to find it to be false, and then we try to tell them about our faith and about the Sabbath. I mean, are we expecting them to believe us once they've found out that, you know, the things we've been sending them before? It's all about witnessing. It's all about demonstrating that we are children of God, and we want to talk about the truth and not spread things that are maybe untrue. And I would say, again, in terms of social media, you know, there are 12 people who are spreading 65% of the misinformation on the media, in social media. This is being spread to millions and millions of people. And we really need to be careful about going to those sites and passing that information on. And I would say, you know, it's easy to watch a video. I think we've been asked to leave. It's easy to watch a video, but it's harder to sit down and read something that debunks that video. I mean, there's a lot of fact checking on the internet that you can go to, but you have to read it. It's not usually in a nice palatable video. You can just sit there and listen to it. You have to read it, and I implore us to do that, because I think it's what's going on now is really going to hamper our witness in the end. So, and I'll just leave you with a quote from Ellen White. She said, "If they see that we are intelligent in regard to health, then they will be more ready to believe we are sound in Bible doctrine